The gymnasium was packed with parents, students, and teachers. A school assembly meant to celebrate unity had suddenly turned into a spectacle of humiliation. On stage, a black boy stood frozen, his cheek burning red from the sheriff's slap that echoed like thunder in the shocked silence. The sheriff, smug, unapologetic, laughing under his breath. No one moved, not the principal, not the teachers, not even the boys' classmates. Because in towns like this one, silence wasn't just normal, it was survival. But then, just as the tension reached its peak, the gym doors swung open with a bang. Heavy boots hit the polished floor with precision. A tall black man, dressed in a tailored suit with military medals glinting across his chest, walked in. Every eye turned, every mouth dropped. And what did he do? He clapped, loud, slow, purposeful, and in that moment the sheriff's smug grin began to tremble. Because what nobody knew was, that black boy, he wasn't just anybody. And the man in that suit, he wasn't just some officer. He was the United States Secretary of Defense, and he was here for him. The sun beamed through the gymnasium's high windows, casting golden streaks across the glossy hardwood floor. Banners hung proudly above the bleachers, and rows of folding chairs were filled with students, parents, and teachers buzzing with excitement. It was Unity Day, a celebration of diversity, achievement, and progress. But beneath the surface, in this small southern town, not everyone believed in those values. 13-year-old Elijah Reed sat nervously in the front row, his tie slightly crooked, shoes freshly polished. He had been chosen to give the final speech, a short, hopeful message about inclusion and dreams for the future. He had practiced it for days. His mom had helped him memorize every word. And now, clutching the paper in his hands, he waited for his turn. That's when the sheriff arrived. Sheriff Donald Ray Barnes, a towering man with a broad chest and a cold stare, known across the county for keeping order, which everyone knew was code for intimidation, especially when it came to black folks. He wasn't supposed to be part of the event, but he'd heard a kid was speaking on equality and decided to attend uninvited. As Elijah was called to the stage, the sheriff smirked, leaned back against the wall, and crossed his arms. Elijah walked up to the mic, voice trembling but steady, and began his speech. I believe that no matter where you come from, what color your skin is, or what language you speak, you deserve a chance, a fair one, just like everyone else. A few students clapped softly. Parents smiled, but the sheriff's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward, boots echoing loudly against the floor. The principal whispered something, likely pleading for him to stop, but Barnes kept going. He climbed onto the stage, grabbed the mic, and snarled, "You think this is your pulpit, boy?" The room went still. Elijah opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the sheriff's hand lashed out. Smack! The sound bounced off the walls like a gunshot. Elijah stumbled back, his cheek flaming, eyes wide with shock. Gasps erupted. A teacher started to rise, but hesitated. The principal froze. Parents whispered. Some turned their eyes away. And Elijah? He just stood there, silent, shaking, swallowing the pain. The sheriff leaned in close and muttered, "Know your place." There it was, the lesson so many had been taught in silence: fear, obedience, submission. The gym, moments ago filled with hopeful energy, now felt like a cage, and still no one moved. That's when the doors at the back burst open. Everyone turned. Boots clicked confidently against the floor. A man in a dark suit, tall and broad-shouldered, strode forward with an air of quiet command. Rows of medals shimmered on his chest. His eyes, sharp and deliberate, locked onto the sheriff. Then came the clapping, slow, deliberate, echoing with weight far greater than applause. The sheriff straightened, confused. Teachers looked around. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The man stepped up to the stage, eyes not leaving Elijah for a moment. Then calmly he turned to the sheriff and said, "Did you just strike a child at a public school event?" Silence, because now everything was about to change. For a moment the gymnasium stood frozen in disbelief, a still frame in time where power was being recalibrated. Sheriff Barnes stared at the man in uniform, blinking as if trying to recognize a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost. It was General Langston Cole, the United States Secretary of Defense, the highest-ranking black man in the nation's military chain of command, decorated in wars most Americans only read about, respected by presidents, feared by tyrants. And today he wasn't in Washington. He was here, in a small-town school gym, standing between a frightened boy and an unrepentant sheriff. The sheriff's voice cracked slightly as he scoffed. "And who the hell are you?" General Cole didn't flinch. He reached into his coat pocket and slowly revealed a badge and ID card. The room collectively inhaled. Langston J. Cole, Secretary of Defense, appointed by the President of the United States, former General of the U.S. Army, and a man who will not tolerate injustice, especially not against a child. You could hear a pin drop. Sheriff Barnes took a half step back, suddenly aware of the camera phone's recording. The dozens of eyes fixed on him, the gravity of his actions suffocating him like a noose. Still, pride was a stubborn demon. This boy disrespected the flag, disrespecting the values of this country. Cole's tone sharpened. You don't get to define the values of this country, especially not with your hand on a child's face. He stepped closer, looking the sheriff dead in the eye. Let me ask you something. You ever serve? Ever wear a uniform for anything other than parade days? Barnes didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. Cole turned to the stunned principal. Was this man invited to speak? No, sir, the principal stammered. He forced his way onto the stage. General Cole looked to the crowd. Did anyone authorize him to discipline this child? Did anyone give him the right to strike him? A chorus of soft but firm no's came from the teachers and parents. Sheriff Barnes shifted, as if preparing to walk off the stage. But Cole wasn't done. He raised his voice now, not in anger, but in authority. Then hear this. In the name of justice, accountability, and the values that this country is actually supposed to stand for, Sheriff Donald Barnes, you are under investigation, and until that investigation is complete, you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Gasps broke out. A few students even clapped. Barnes, red-faced, tried to protest. You don't have that authority. I do, Cole cut in. And if you resist, I'll have U.S. Marshals here within the hour. Your badge will mean nothing. Just then, two plain-clothed men stepped out from the side entrance, agents who had walked in quietly behind Cole. With calm precision, they approached Barnes, asked for his weapon, and escorted him off the stage. The sheriff's boots dragged, but his voice was silent now. And Elijah? He still hadn't moved, still stood there, stunned, a quiet tear rolling down his cheek. Cole turned to him, knelt down, and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. You're brave, and I want you to finish your speech. Elijah looked up, eyes wide. Now? Cole smiled. Especially now. The world needs to hear it, and I'll be right here beside you. And in that moment, with injustice removed and courage restored, Elijah stepped back to the mic. The boy they tried to silence was about to speak. Elijah took a trembling breath, fingers clutching the crumpled paper he had nearly dropped moments earlier. The sting on his cheek still throbbed, but something deeper now stirred in him. Not fear, not shame, but purpose. With General Langston Cole standing beside him, hand on his shoulder, Elijah raised his chin to the microphone. He cleared his throat, voice shaking at first. "Good morning," he began. "My name is Elijah Carter. I'm 13 years old, and I came here today to speak about what it means to be American." Silence. Not a single cough, not a shuffle from the audience. I know some people think patriotism means standing a certain way, saying certain words, but I think real patriotism is when you love your country enough to want it to be better. He paused, gathering strength from the towering presence beside him. "My granddad fought in Vietnam. He was told he was a hero when he wore a uniform, but when he came home, he couldn't even sit at the same lunch counter as the men he fought next to." "That's not right." Whispers stirred in the crowd. Parents leaned forward. Teachers blinked back tears. "My mom says justice isn't just a word. It's an action. It's what we're supposed to do when we see something wrong." He looked over at the empty spot where Sheriff Barnes had stood. "I didn't kneel to disrespect a flag. I knelt because I love this country, and I want it to live up to the promise it made to all of us, even kids like me. Even if my skin is brown, even if people think I don't belong." You could feel the walls of the gym straining to contain the emotion. Some parents were wiping their eyes. A few teachers had started clapping softly. Elijah's voice grew stronger. "Today I got hit because I stood, or knelt, for what I believe in. But I'm still standing, and I'll keep standing. For justice, for respect, for every kid who's ever been told they're less." General Cole nodded beside him, visibly moved. "And I want to say thank you to everyone who believes in me, to Secretary Cole, to my mom, and to anyone out there who thinks they're too small to matter. You're not. Your voice matters. You matter." With that, Elijah folded his paper. The gym was silent for a beat, then erupted. Applause thundered through the bleachers. Some stood. Others shouted his name. And Elijah, he just stood there, overwhelmed but calm. A boy who had been shoved, now held up by truth. General Cole took the mic briefly, smiling. "There are moments in history when the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. This was one of them." Then he looked down at Elijah. "You're not just a student anymore. Today you were a leader." And in that crowded gym, with students chanting and teachers cheering, something changed, not just for Elijah, but for every young black boy who'd ever been told to sit down, shut up, or behave. Today, one of them spoke, and the nation listened. While the applause still echoed in the gymnasium, Sheriff Clyde Barnes sat in the security office, watching it all unfold on a small monitor. The cheers, the chants, the standing ovation for the boy he'd struck. Every second pierced his pride like a blade. He hadn't expected the Secretary of Defense to walk through those doors, and he definitely hadn't expected the nation to be watching. His phone buzzed nonstop. Voicemails from the county office, his supervisor, the school board, messages that didn't sound like support but concern, maybe even panic. The smug look he wore when he marched onto that gym floor was long gone now. Then the door opened. Principal Hernandez entered first, jaw clenched, eyes cold. Behind him, two officers from Internal Affairs followed, their expressions unreadable. "Sheriff Barnes," Hernandez said curtly, "you're to turn over your badge and firearm. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending an investigation." Barnes shot up. "Now hold on, just a damn—" One of the IA officers stepped forward. "We've reviewed the footage. You laid your hands on a minor. Unprovoked. That's assault, Sheriff." "It wasn't unprovoked," Barnes growled. "That kid disrespected the—" "No," Hernandez cut him off. "What you did was abuse your power. You turned a school assembly into a public humiliation of a child, and you did it with the eyes of children watching. You don't get to justify that, Barnes fumbled, red-faced and trembling, as the officers removed his badge and gun. As he was escorted out the back door, he caught glimpses of news vans arriving outside. Reporters with cameras, microphones, waiting to pounce. The crowd outside had grown. Parents, activists, students, all demanding accountability. Someone held a sign that read, "We stand with Elijah." Barnes turned his face, but it was too late. The cameras caught everything. His red, furious eyes, his hands behind his back, and the humiliating truth written across his face. Inside the gym, Elijah sat in the front row now, flanked by Secretary Cole and Principal Hernandez. A hush fell over the room again as the school board stepped up to the microphone. Today, one of the board members began, we witnessed not only a tragedy, but a triumph. A tragedy that an innocent child was assaulted by someone sworn to protect him. A triumph that our students, staff, and community stood up for what was right. She turned toward Elijah. Elijah Carter, on behalf of this district, we apologize, and we promise change. Another board member stepped forward. Effective immediately, new policies are being implemented regarding law enforcement presence in our schools. Cultural sensitivity training, oversight, and student advocacy protections will be prioritized. This is not just a response, it's a reckoning. The applause that followed wasn't just supportive, it was cathartic, a release of years of silent pain and overlooked injustice. Teachers wept, parents embraced, students stood taller. In that moment, justice wasn't just a courtroom word, it was something seen, heard, and felt, in the actions taken, in the boy defended, and in the sheriff who finally faced consequences. As the sun began to set, casting golden rays across the school campus, it was clear this wasn't the end. This was a beginning, a new chapter where voices like Elijah's would never be dismissed again, where those in power would be held accountable, no matter the badge they wore, and where a school, a town, and a nation began to realize justice isn't just what you say, it's what you do. The days that followed were like nothing Elijah had ever experienced. What began as a horrifying slap in front of his classmates had now become a national conversation. News outlets replayed the moment the Secretary of Defense had walked into that gym, clapping for the boy who'd been humiliated. Social media overflowed with support, and hashtags like number justice for Elijah and number protect black children began trending globally. But Elijah wasn't interested in fame. He sat in his room, looking at the messages pouring in. One from a teacher in Detroit said, "You reminded me why I started teaching." Another from a boy in Georgia read, "I've been bullied by school cops too. Thank you for standing tall." His mother, Ms. Carter, had barely slept. She had spent the past few days talking to lawyers, activists, journalists, but each time she looked at Elijah, she softened. He hadn't crumbled. He hadn't hidden. He had stood his ground, with dignity. "Elijah," she said gently one morning, placing her hand on his shoulder, "what do you want to do with all this attention?" Elijah looked at her, his voice steady. "I want to speak, not about me, but about kids like me who don't have a Secretary of Defense walk in, who just get slapped and forgotten." And so he did. A week later, Elijah took the stage again. This time, it wasn't in the gym. It was at a televised youth justice summit in Washington, D.C. The crowd was enormous. Politicians, educators, civil rights leaders all came to listen. Elijah stood at the podium, wearing a plain black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes steady but glowing with purpose. He took a breath and began. "I'm not here to talk about a slap. I'm here to talk about what it means when no one believes you deserve respect. I'm here to talk about being a kid and being seen as a threat. I'm here to talk about how it shouldn't take someone powerful walking in to make people care. That day in the gym, I felt small, like my voice didn't matter. But when Secretary Cole clapped for me, it wasn't just for me. It was for every black boy who's been silenced, every girl who's been dismissed, every student who's been told, you're too much or you don't belong. Well, we do belong, and we're not too much. We're just enough. The room erupted. It was more than applause. It was an emotional roar. Some cried openly, others held their hands over their hearts. The secretary himself nodded from the front row, visibly moved. Elijah's speech made headlines again, but this time it wasn't just about what happened to him. It was about the future he was shaping. Programs were launched in his name, scholarships created. Schools across the country began revisiting their disciplinary policies. Elijah had lit a spark, and it was spreading like wildfire. Back at school, things had changed too. Where students once whispered behind his back, they now stood beside him. Teachers asked for his input. The principal invited him to join the student leadership board. Even the janitor smiled at him differently, like he was more than just a student. He was a symbol. But Elijah didn't let it go to his head. He knew this wasn't about being a hero. It was about being a mirror, reflecting the change the world desperately needed to see. Months later, the school auditorium, once filled with fear and shame, was now buzzing with hope. It was the annual assembly again, but this time, there was no sheriff pacing with a smug grin, no threat lurking in the corners. The stage belonged to someone new, Elijah Carter. He stood beneath a banner that read, Voices of Tomorrow. Behind him were student leaders of every race, color, and background, each one handpicked by the student body. And in the front row sat Secretary Marcus Cole, wearing a quiet smile. The same gym that had witnessed a brutal slap now echoed with applause for a young man who chose to rise. Elijah stepped to the microphone, his heart pounding, but his voice clear. Last year, I stood on this floor as a kid just trying to survive another school day. I never imagined that a moment of violence would lead me here. Not because I wanted fame, but because I refused to be silent. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. I stand here for every student who has ever felt small, for every kid who has been told, you're too loud, you're too dark, you're not enough. I'm here to tell you, you are enough. You always have been. The room was still, as if everyone were holding their breath. And to those in power, if you ever forget who we are, we will remind you. Not with hate, not with violence, but with truth and strength and unity. This time the standing ovation came from everyone. Teachers, students, parents, and yes, even from members of the school board who had once stayed silent. That moment marked a shift, not just in the school, but in the community. The sheriff who had slapped Elijah had been fired, and an investigation revealed years of unchecked abuse by several officers in the school system. Sweeping reforms followed. Body cameras were required, oversight committees were formed, and more importantly, voices like Elijah's were no longer dismissed, they were valued. Elijah didn't return to being just another student. He was invited to speak at universities, featured in national campaigns, and even met the president, who called him a young man of rare courage. But through it all, Elijah stayed grounded. He still did his homework. He still helped his mom fold laundry on weekends. He still played basketball at the local court with his friends, though now younger kids came up to him asking for advice instead of autographs. One afternoon, as he walked home from school, a little boy ran up beside him. "Are you the kid who got slapped?" Elijah smiled gently. "Yeah," he said, "but that's not the whole story." The boy looked confused. "Then what is?" Elijah knelt down to his level. "The real story is that I got back up, and I didn't stop walking." As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting gold over the neighborhood, Elijah Carter walked on. Not as a victim, not even just as a survivor, but as a catalyst, a leader, a symbol of what can happen when dignity refuses to bow, and when one act of courage sparks a wave of change. Now here's the closing line for your video. Do you think we've reached a point where courage can finally challenge power and win? Or is this just the beginning of a much longer fight? And don't forget to say, if this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the Arc of Stories for more powerful true stories that deserve to be heard.